Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, just a few days away from National Signing Day. Of course, the second National Signing Day with the early period in December taking over for the past couple recruiting cycles. We got EJ Holland from 247 Sports on the line to give us some insight as few can. EJ, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Definitely. So, as I mentioned and alluded to off the top, the early signing period has taken over these first two recruiting cycles since it was put into place. Are you a bit surprised that we're now seeing 85–90% of the Power 5 players signing during December, and it's kind of taken over as National Signing Day?
Surprise is a difficult word, I guess. It is kind of interesting, I would say. The last few years before the early period, I mean, you had a lot of kids kind of take it down to the wire all the way to February. Once the early period was instituted, I guess, you had more players just start siding with the early period the first year, which was last year. And this year, it seemed like you said 85–90% decided to sign in December, which I guess they're kind of, schools are trying to lock down their spots. So I think a lot of schools are telling guys, hey, you need to sign early. We want to lock you in. If not, we're going to continue to recruit during the late period. And I think that's helped schools keep kids and has helped the classes stay together. But at the same time, it's twofold because you have situations where, a coach might leave and they're locked in, or an offensive coordinator or a position coach might leave and they're locked in. And, at that point, when it's not the head coach, it's hard to request a waiver to gain eligibility or to get out of your NLI. So, yeah, I think the early period has changed the game in that sense. It's also changed the game in the sense that the cycles are accelerated. You have spring official visit, summer visit, guys decisions way before December, a lot of spring decisions. So it's definitely changed the complexity of recruiting overall, and the landscape is just completely different than it was 2 years ago.
EJ Holland joining us from 247 Sports to break down the recruiting cycle as we come to the conclusion of the 2019 class and look to 20 and 21 as coaches are already diving into those classes. Some of the big targets still out there despite the numbers being on the December side in regards to signees. What are some of the big storylines and any particular recruits that you're tracking?
Yeah, it's tough because there aren't a ton of recruits to track. Out here in Texas, the top guys have basically all signed. I think the only unsigned prospect in the state that's not committed to or the top unsigned guy that's not committed to a school is Stephen Parker out of South Oak Cliff. He's a 4-star defensive end. He's officially visiting Kansas this weekend. He was formerly committed to Texas Tech after the Cliff Kingsbury firing. He kind of opened things up. So he's looking at Kansas. He's officially visited Nebraska, Colorado. But you're getting into like those types of recruitments. I think one of the wild ones is Javonne Shepherd. He's a 4-star offensive lineman out of Houston North Forest. He's currently committed to Texas. It's an interesting situation. He's been committed to Texas since the summer, but this is one of those odd roller coaster recruitments that hasn't involved a bunch of flip commitments. It's more, I'm visiting here, I'm not visiting here, I'm going to show up, I'm not going to show up. There are a bunch of people involved in the background of his recruitment. So that one's just been a whirlwind for Texas. He officially visited Texas A&M earlier this month, as well as Alabama and Georgia. Texas gets him in for the final weekend. So right now we are expecting the Longhorns to keep Javonne Shepherd, but it's going to be tough. That recruitment has taken so many turns that anything can happen late. Texas A&M has always been a threat there. Jimbo Fisher is obviously doing a very good job in the state of Texas this year. Texas has done a great job all over the country. Both have top 5 recruiting classes in the nation, as does OU. So you have them 3, 4, 5, Texas, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M, which is a little crazy. But yeah, Javonne Shepherd, Stephen Parker are some of those guys that I've been tracking here in the state of Texas.
EJ, you hit on where I was headed. Jimbo versus Tom Herman, and both are doing a tremendous job. And this seems to be something that's going to be setting up for a war within the state of Texas and beyond the borders for the next few years.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, complexity of Texas has kind of changed a little bit with the arrival of both Tom Herman and Jimbo Fisher. In the 18 cycle, Texas completely dominated the state, landing guys like Anthony Cook, BJ Foster, Caden Stearns, all really high level guys, Jalen Green. I mean, that defensive back haul that Texas had in the 2018 cycle was historic. It was really that good. And overall, I mean, they really won some heated recruiting battles in the state. I mean, most of the top 10, top 15 guys landed at Texas. I think a lot of that had to do with the newness of Tom Herman, as well as, how calculated they are on the recruiting trail. Texas has a great support staff with guys like Derek Chang and Brian Carrington that really help UT identify guys and kind of just methodically put together a really well-rounded class. This cycle is a little different. I think some guys, were considered Texas leans early on, guys like Brian Williams and Damani Richardson. And a lot of thought was, hey, well, I mean, Texas just landed a top 5 class. They're coming off a bowl win over Missouri. They're going to be able to keep this pace up. And I think it was a little kind of not really shocking. I mean, Jimbo Fisher has a national championship under his belt. He's a guy that's completely well respected around college football. But I think it just caught people a little bit off guard how he was able to close on some of those guys early, like both Damani Richardson, Brian Williams, Dalen Wright. How he was able to kind of close on those guys early, and it was kind of like, oh man, Jimbo Fisher's for real. He's going to win some of these big recruiting battles. And so Texas A&M has done a tremendous job this cycle, landing those guys that I mentioned, as well as DeMarvin Leal, who has an argument to be the top overall prospect in the state. And for Texas, I think they did a tremendous job of adjusting their game plan and said, okay, I mean, we have some absolute wars in the state of Texas that we're going to try to win, but we have a lot of connections nationally. So let's go national and get the best players we can get regardless. The University of Texas is a national brand. And so Texas went out west. They landed DeGabriel Floyd, who's one of the best linebackers in the country out of California, Chris Adamora, who's a top 50 national player out of California as well. Jake Smith, the national Gatorade High School Player of the Year. They had some weirdness late, but were able to get 5-star athlete Bru McCoy on board from California. So, you have to remember Tom Herman grew up in the state of California. He went to college at Cal Lutheran, which produces a lot of coaches. And so he has a lot of ties out there. Tim Peck, their offensive coordinator, used to be a high school coach in Arizona. So Texas went nationally, and they actually are ahead of Texas A&M in the composite rankings right now, which is kind of weird because Texas A&M holds a majority of commitments in state. But yeah, man, I mean, to your point, I think this coming cycle, the 2020 cycle, is going to be really telling because the newness has worn off. This was Jimbo Fisher's first recruiting cycle. The last one was Tom Herman's first full recruiting cycle. So this is where it kind of begins. You're kind of on an even playing field. Texas A&M had a really good season. Texas is coming off a Sugar Bowl victory over Georgia, which I think gives them a little bit of in-state momentum moving into the spring. But yeah, you're going to see some big dogfights between Texas and Texas A&M. Even though they don't play on the field, they're definitely big recruiting rivals.